Hello, boys and girls. It's Mr. Page coming back at you regarding our new lesson today. Today, we're talking about, again, the five spheres of the Earth, and most specifically, the interactions of the atmosphere and the biosphere. In our prior learning, we learned that the Earth can be divided up into five spheres that interact with each other. Now, we have the atmosphere, which is air, the biosphere, which is all living things, the lithosphere, land, and it can include anything um, that is very explosive, like um, volcanoes. The hydrosphere, which is water, and the cryosphere, which is ice, like glaciers. So the layers of the atmosphere we talked about, the troposphere, which is our first layer of the atmosphere. And I want you to understand the atmosphere is a very thin layer by comparison of the Earth's mass and size. It's a very thin layer, but very, very important. The Earth is the only planet that we are aware of today that has this protective layer, this blanket that protects us from radiation from the sun, that protects us from meteors that try to penetrate and crash into the earth. You know, if you look at the moon has uh, craters all over it. That's because it doesn't have this protective layer. Meteors, asteroids come in, enter the orbit, and crash right into the moon. That would be very devastating if that were happening on Earth, wouldn't it? But because of our protective layer of the atmosphere, the heat caused by these meteors trying to penetrate our atmosphere, uh, the heat burns them up before most of them ever reach the Earth. So the troposphere, then we have the stratosphere, which is a little bit higher in the atmosphere. The mesosphere, that's where the heat barrier is established that prevents meteors from penetrating our orbit, our atmosphere. And at the top, we have the thermosphere, which prevents excessive heat from the sun burning up the earth. It also prevents necessary heat for the earth to operate, function properly. It prevents the heat from the earth from escaping. Because if all of our heat escaped, guess what would happen? We would be a frozen tundra. We would be living in an ice age. So this atmosphere is extremely, extremely important. This layer called the atmosphere. It's a four-part layer. More on the biosphere. We talked about this before. And this is the zone of all of life on Earth. All living things, including humans, all organic matter. That means plants, um, fungi, insects, everything. All organic matter. The biosphere is structured into a hierarchy known as the food chain. And the food chain starts with the sun. If you don't have the sun, you have no energy. You have no photosynthesis. You have no plants, grass. Those are the producers. No fruits, no nuts, no no producers. And as we know, consumers like animals and humans eat producers for energy. So this chain of energy starts with the sun, and that energy is transferred into plants, and that energy is transferred into animals and fish and every other living thing. Energy and mass is transferred from one level of the food chain up the food chain to the next level. Larger and larger organisms. Here's an example depicted in this diagram. It starts off with grass, a producer. You cannot have grass without photosynthesis. You cannot have photosynthesis without the sun. That goes back to my original point. You must have sun. We're fortunate on Earth to be perfectly located at a perfect distance from the sun so that we don't get burned up and we don't get frozen out. But we're able to produce grass and plants and fruits and vegetables. And those things are eaten by the next level up on the food chain, which would be the first consumer. These will be your insects, like the grasshopper. The next level up might be a bluebird, a secondary consumer. All right. So the bluebird eats the grasshopper. The snake is this. The bird would be the secondary consumer. The third consumer, called a tertiary consumer, is the snake. The snake eats the bird. And then you have the top of the food chain, the owl. In this case, it could be a lion or a bear, but a bigger organism eats the snake. The top of the food chain is called the apex predator. Apex meaning top, the top predator. But now, when the grass and the apex predator die, guess what happens? The decomposers take over. They decompose the dead owl and the dead grass, and they decompose it, and it goes back into the soil. Decomposers break down organic matter and break it down until it becomes part of the soil once again. Now, this is a food web. Now, a food web is just a very complex and integrated food chain. Everything's eating everything. But you cannot have a food chain or food web without the sun. And food webs, often you find that there are different spheres involved. So land animals might be eating organisms from the hydrosphere, like bears eating fish. Fish live in the hydrosphere, bears live in the lithosphere. Or excuse me, bears live in the biosphere. So you have interactions between different spheres, bears and fish. So you have the biosphere and the hydrosphere. So these food webs can integrate different spheres in terms of where they're sourcing their food. The source of all energy is the sun, then plants, then insects, then animals, small to large. Food webs can provide food energy from multiple spheres, providing a supermarket of food for all living things. Food webs are just complex food chains. Sphere interactions. Events in one sphere will cause interactive impact on one or more other spheres. There's two types of interactions: constructive interactions, where there's a helpful impact like rainfall, that's normal. If it's average and normal, that's constructive. Destructive would be a harmful impact like a hurricane, excessive, destructive rainfall. Can you think of ways where changes in the atmosphere can impact the biosphere? What about changes in the lithosphere? How can that change the atmosphere? How can it change the biosphere? Think about that for a second. Stop the video and think about those interactions. Complex sphere interactions. In addition to the four events that are shown here between the different four spheres shown in purple spheres, there are 6 complex interactions that occur between spheres. The 10 types of interactions that can occur within the Earth spheres often occur as a series of chain reactions. Here with a red arrow, I show interactions between the atmosphere and the biosphere. Okay, so it's not just an event that interacts with the atmosphere or an event that causes an interaction between the biosphere. It could be a chain reaction where one event affects both the atmosphere and the biosphere. This means that one interaction leads to another interaction, which leads to yet another interaction, a chain reaction. It is a ripple effect through the Earth's spheres. So that's what I wanted you to think about today. Let's explore 2 spheres today, atmosphere and biosphere. Let's look at a few events. For example, excessive carbon dioxide, greater than 1%, which is normal. That causes trapped heat, increases in evaporation, increase in rainfall because of the increase in evaporation, increase in vapor, increase in heat, holes in the ozone, in the stratosphere, global warming, melting glaciers, destroyed polar habitats so that the polar bears don't have anywhere to live because the ice is melting, the glaciers are melting and crashing into the sea. Crazy weather, hurricanes and floods, electrical storms, thunderstorms, forest fires caused by thunder and lightning, destroyed land habitats. If the forest burns down, where are the chipmunks going to live? Interactions in the atmosphere and biosphere are becoming more and more common, and these are things that we need to think about. Can you think of any other interactions between events in the atmosphere, how it impacts living things in the biosphere? Could changes in the lower atmosphere, which is the troposphere, the lower atmosphere, change the airflow around the Earth? Sure, certainly they can. Changes in temperature of the layers of the troposphere cause winds and can lead to extreme events that can impact the biosphere. Tornadoes, hurricanes, thunderstorms, forest fires. Well, that's it, boys and girls. Until next time, feel free to watch this video again as often as you need. Make sure to complete the assignments associated with the lesson. And remember, learn something new every day. Every day, learn something new. Every single day. Up next, the lithosphere and the biosphere. Fascinating interactions explained.